Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Crushing Strongholds. My name is Mickey. I'm your host today, and I have an amazing guest joining us. His name is Paul Granger, and I'm excited to bring him to the table. He has a lot to offer. And Paul is a volunteer minister in the volunteer ministry. Excuse me, I said that crazy, and Paul is learning what it is to be an ambassador for Christ. And I can guarantee you, it's in a lot of significant ways. I can almost bet money on that. And so I want to bring Paul in and have him introduce himself, tell us about himself. And Paul, thank you for joining us on Crushing Strongholds today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. I'm excited to have conversation. I really love, in the little bit we've already connected, when you know you're going to talk to someone that like you're just going to resonate on a lot of things. It's just so life giving. So I'm excited.
Yay! I'm excited too. Yeah, I saw your your profile and then I went to your website and I literally, like I said, excuse me, before we started recording, that your website is fantastic. It really is.
Mhm.
And I love that you write with your children. You write books with your kids, and that just is amazing in itself. But one thing I want to talk to you about is something that I've actually spent a little bit of time doing is doing the front porching. I've been listening to your episodes and
Mm.
man, that is so exciting. I love what you're doing. You want to tell us how you came about doing that
Oh
and what
man,
that's all about?
the front porch and series. It's been a while since I've made one of those, but I think about it often because the core of it is I live in a community that has had to navigate a number of hardships and has had to navigate a significant amount of transition. And sometimes there aren't spaces to process what's happening and what that means. And so there's two things that are going on in that. One is we wanted to create a space to go deeper into some of these topics, whether it's education or housing or race or any number of things that were impacting neighbors, but two, to do it in such a way that feels neighborly. So the reason it's the front porch, and sometimes recording on a front porch is tricky, especially if it doesn't have a front porch. We had a few of those. But there's this idea of front porch culture versus back porch culture.
Mm,
And front porch culture is you understand your house as a part of a community and relationally oriented. That when you want to relax, you go out there, and if you're on your front porch, that means if a neighbor walks by, you're going to end up having to interact. So there's an expectation of connection, even if it's just a hello or a wave. And then there's back porch culture, which is your home is more your sanctuary. Uh, if you have to park in the front, it's to go to the front door, but where you spend your time is in the backyard. Um, you might have a 6 foot privacy fence, and it is kind of to get away. Now, it's not that one is right and one is wrong, but it's important to know the values in each
right.
and the impacts of each. And when you live in a community like mine that has traditionally been front porch culture, and when it is so densely populated, when that is absent, when someone is separating themselves out, it could be felt. It could have an impact. And so we wanted to kind of come in the opposite spirit of that and be visible, be present, and have very comfortable, organic conversations. And the real heart of it is just creating a space for those guests. The host is a friend of mine, and we try to minimize ourselves as much as possible and put as much focus on giving that person a chance to share, to process openly, to ask questions that aren't tapping into them being an expert, but tapping into them being a person with experiences and thoughts and emotions and feelings and hopes and dreams. And what's encouraging for me is there are practical reasons why I had to stop doing that, but those values have transitioned into my podcast. And it's that same deal. It doesn't happen on a front porch, though some of them have, but it's that still cultivating a space to authentically and genuinely process uh, some of the hard questions of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched several of those. I was like, once I watched one, I was hooked right there. And I thought, man, you're right because when I go out front, we barbecue and we have a jacuzzi and we did we even do outdoor theater in our backyard. We do a lot,
Ooh.
because we have kids, my grandkids, and we do all kinds of stuff like that. But when you
Yeah.
go out
Yeah.
front, it's like, somebody walks by, you say, you just say that occasional hello, or you see your neighbor across the street, hey. And
Hmm.
a couple of my neighbors, we'll see them and we'll chat, and talk and stuff. But it's not as big of a community event as if you're inviting someone to your house and having them over for a gathering.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
you miss that. And even when I walk around our neighborhood, I'm kind of a social butterfly, so I don't mind saying hi to people. But some people will
Hmm.
just kind of, they just kind of walk they don't even want to
Hmm.
acknowledge that you're there, and it's like, wow, and um, not very personable.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I enjoy it when people walk by, and I always try to make contact with them. I say,
Yeah.
hello, how are you? How's your day? Or I like your dog. Or I always say something, to try to engage in conversation. But
Hmm.
I love that because my grandma, true story, my grandma used to sit on the front porch.
Hmm.
Um, and we used she had a swing, like not like a big swing, but just like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
wooden,
Yeah.
old rickety sit down bench swing.
Uh-huh.
And that thing, I used to think she used to say, now don't hit the wall and don't flip it over. You're gonna pinch your
Hmm.
fingers. And when
Hmm.
I was growing up, and then when my kids got there and they sat on it, I said, don't hit the wall and don't everything she
Yeah.
said, I said. But we spent so much time sitting out there just talking, and the neighbors would come over and hang out and talk with us, and it was real enjoyable.
Yeah.
Those were
Yeah.
good moments,
Yeah.
brought some good memories. So I thought that was really interesting that you were doing that. I think that doing that, I think helps build like the community unity that's needed. And I think
Hmm.
that's wonderful. I mean, I wish like that was happening all around. That would be
Yeah.
great, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what was really striking to me that I didn't notice at first is that nearly every episode you can hear construction in the background.
Oh,
And so
wow.
the community was actively growing and changing. But what came with that was often a sense of disconnection. You would think that more people, there's going to be more connection. But it seemed like it was the opposite. And so I agree with you, these kind of spaces, and it doesn't have to be recorded. It can be what you just described. Like anybody who has a communal space, whether it's just a stoop or it's a bench across the street in the park, can cultivate space to process with people, to engage. And here's the other thing I'll say, because somebody listening can be like, well, that's great for you podcast people who don't mind being on a microphone and talking, but I'm an introvert and I really, yeah, I don't want to interact. I'm an introvert. I hate small talk. So that's the wild thing is me sitting on the front porch and having to interact with people that I don't know because there's a lot of foot traffic. So I'll see a lot of people I don't know. That wouldn't be something I would choose. But one thing that God had impressed on me is that wherever I'm living, this is true, but particularly living in this community, uh, I was given an invitation to love my neighbors.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that I knew I needed to love my neighbors is respect the front porch culture that predated me, and to create opportunities for me to lean into that. And here's the really encouraging thing for the introverts out there who are like, I'm scared of interacting with people is um, God can do something through you that you wouldn't be able to muster yourself, right? You got the story of Moses being called, and God said, you're going to go talk to Pharaoh. Moses' response was, I can't talk well, therefore you must be wrong. And he pushed back on God several times. God knew he couldn't talk well. He didn't pick him because he could talk well. He picked him because he wanted to pick him and he could make him talk. And I can't tell you how many times I've left an interaction with a neighbor and realized, how in the world did I just do that? Because that was a whole lot of small talk. I hate small talk. And yet
Mhm.
somehow that was a really life giving moment. And so, yeah, I think, what you shared about cultivating community, that's needed everywhere right now. That's needed I don't think there's a single place on earth that could not benefit from more community cultivation, but we all are a part of that.
Yeah. I have a cute little story. Some neighbors like probably like almost 2 blocks away from us were
Mm-hmm.
walking, and my neighbor was cutting down his tree, and so she knocked on his door. He didn't answer, so she knocked on my door and she said, hey, do you think your neighbor would mind if we had one of these branches? And I was like, "Oh no, go help yourself. He already gave them to me, so you can have them. If you need them." Which was kind of funny because he had already said, "Hey, I'll cut these up. You could burn them in your fireplace because we
Mm-hmm.
burn ours still." And so I was like, "No problem, take them." And so we were conversating, and she told me what she was going to do with the branches. She was going to make them, put them on her front porch, and make a decoration and light it, put lights on it. I thought, well, that's wonderful. That's really great. So I said, I'm going to drive by in a couple days and see what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even know where she lived, but I knew I'd know where she lived because she had the branches.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that now I'm going to know where she lives. So
Yeah.
then a couple weeks later, I run into them in the grocery store, and had we not made that encounter, they would have not even known me. And I was like, "Oh, hey, how are you doing?" And she's like, "Great." And I loved seeing those branches on your front porch.
Yeah.
And she said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, we're getting ready to move them to the back because we want to change up our decorations." She's like, "But we love them. We just absolutely love
Mm-hmm.
them." But it built a relationship now, so there's a safe place. So now, like when they walk by my house or I walk by their house, it's a comfort zone. Because
Yeah.
sometimes when you walk by a stranger's house, you just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when you build that relationship with your neighbors where you can at least say hello or wave or whatever, it does build, it makes it more of a safe haven community to live in too, as well as the unity as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed making that connection with them, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good.
So,
Yeah.
but so in your book, you talked about some hardships. So, um, I want to know what your story is. You write
Yeah.
all of these books. You're an ambassador for Christ. I love your profile, but I want to know more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because there are many books, um, and and I have been struck by how many of them actually lean into the idea of hardship and struggle. And I know why that is. It's because I have often been in a place of hardship or struggle as I've been writing them. And so, even thinking about this conversation and thinking about your question, I have my normal go-to stories, right? That I tell if someone's like, "Well, tell me, where's somewhere you saw God work, or what's something hard you went through?" And those are good stories. Those are hard stories, but I've seen God work through them. Everything from navigating miscarriage with my wife to toxic work environment to unjustly losing a job. Um, but as I sit here now, what's on my mind is there's hardships that I'm navigating that I could get into, and some that I couldn't. But together, they create this general sense of I don't know, dismay, hopelessness, sadness at times, like in the hardest moments, and and especially if those are long term struggles, things I've been praying about for a long time. That's hard on its own. But when you feel like God's inviting you to continue to function in the midst of that, when you're like the Apostle Paul and you're saying, "All right, God, I've got this thorn in my flesh that's keeping me from being able to do ministry well. I need you to take it out." And he's praying 3 times because he's convinced that he cannot serve God well as long as this hardship exists. And then God doesn't remove it. Like that is a hard place. And so, last year, I about a quarter of the way into the year, I found that I had already self-published 4 books on Amazon and felt like I was inviting me to write a book a month, self-publish a book a month, and I felt such a peace about it that I stepped forward into it. One, even though I had no idea if that was even possible, and two, and this is important to your question, I had no capacity because 2024 had already been a year that had drained me. I'd been writing blogs, and one of my blogs that I think about often is this idea of uh, running out of fuel. And God had brought to my mind the analogy of when a plane is flying, they fill up with fuel first, so they know they have enough. They figure out how far they can go in the fuel, and they make sure they don't go further than that. If they, for some reason, hit a storm and use up a lot of fuel, they'll land sooner. But a plane can't fly if it doesn't have enough fuel. It will crash. Except in the scenario of planes that need to stay aloft, uh, there are systems in place for such planes where they can be refueled in the air.
Mm.
In other words, the pilot of those planes know that they are going to have to continue to fly way beyond the fuel capacity, and they are going to have to rely on a source of fuel that is outside the norm. And usually, when they're getting refueled, they can go inside, they can take a break, they can rest. No, they got to keep flying, right?
Mm.
And 2024, I was feeling like that plane. I wanted to land so bad. I'm like, God, I've been long out of fuel, but God kept refueling me in the air. And so I come to 2025 and I'm like, God, I have no capacity. One of the things that I had been navigating is I have a podcast episode that goes into more detail, so I won't go into it now. But my wife has been navigating some pretty traumatic things, including nearly 20 years ago, she had an experience where she blacked out and suddenly felt like she was in hell. Like it was the
Mm.
realest thing she had ever experienced. It was like time was elongated. I mean, it was torturous. It was enough that she had to take um, at least half a year off school. It was traumatic enough that every year, at least once in the year, she wakes up in the middle of the night feeling like it's happening again. And that has been incredibly challenging for her to navigate. But also, as her husband, it's been something that I've had to figure out how to navigate. And there's all the reverberations that can come from that, the fears and the anxieties, the impact on day to day life. Um, and I've been full time volunteer ministry since 2018. And so I'm living a very untraditional lifestyle, haven't gotten a paycheck since then. And there's a lot of financial fears or stresses or anxieties or unsolicited input from others that can make life generally hard. And I'm trying to live as an ambassador of Christ, meaning that it's not that I have a specific task or a specific role, but every day I wake up and say, all right, God, how can I represent you well? And he gives me a lot of different things, which means life has been incredibly inconsistent. And I live in a community that carries a lot of struggles and needs. And I'm invited to care for folks in some really hard spaces. And so this list, I felt like there was a lot that was needed from me, and my fuel was exhausted, and God wouldn't let me land. And then I come into 2025, and God's like, hey, what if you self published a book a month? And what I came to realize God was doing was not, this is not about content generation. Let me just say that just out the gate, because that's normally what writing a book is about.
Mm.
Uh, I knew from the start that these would not be about me becoming a bestseller. These would not be even about income generation. Uh, these might not even ever be read. That's the sense that God gave me. But He was inviting me to process what I was navigating, but to do so in a way that I was willing to do, to make it public, transparent, vulnerable. Because a lot of times people will get the cleaned up version of the stories,
Mm.
but people won't always put themselves out there when they're still in the mess, when they're still struggling. One of the early books I did was called, last year was Rejecting Joy No Longer. And it came from a place where I did not feel joy. Like, and I was getting pretty mad at God about it. Like, God, I've been trying to serve you. Why aren't you giving me joy? And I was in a space where worship was happening, and there was this young lady next to me who was just exuding worship. I mean, she was in it, and I could just see it all over her. And I was just standing there. I wasn't even singing. Definitely didn't have my hands up or anything like that. And I had this little sense of like, what if you just started doing what she was doing? And I was like, no, no, I don't want to. I don't feel like it. And and it wasn't that God was saying, if you do that, then something will happen. But God was trying to confront me that what if that was an opportunity for me to experience joy and I rejected it?
Yeah.
What if the issue isn't that God is not giving me joy? It's that joy is right there and it's not the joy I want. It's not in
Mm.
the way that I want. And that wrecked me a little bit. And I felt like God was inviting me to spend the next 30 days uh, on one verse a day dealing with joy and to just genuinely, honestly, vulnerably, transparently process it and then put it out there to others. Not clean, polished, hey, I'm a good Christian, but yeah, I'm rejecting joy.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't like this verse right now. And I found that there was so much that I wrote that was coming from that space. It was not because I had figured things out. It was not because I had solved things. It's because I was mad at God, or I was confused at what God was doing, or I was done. Like one of the last ones I wrote is based off Psalm 13. It's called How Long, Lord? And in that psalm, David has gone through so much hardship for so long that he says, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How
Mm.
long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day and night have sorrow in my heart?" Like, that's not a worship song.
Right.
Like, that's a lament. Aren't you supposed to say God's amazing and everything's good? But what David knew is that who God was and his love had space for him to be raw
Mhm.
and upset and call God out on what he thought God was or wasn't doing. And what David also knew is that just because he did not feel like God was showing up did not mean he wasn't. And so at the end, you get these two verses where he claims who God is. And sometimes we take that as, oh, we're just supposed to have positive thinking when things are happening, just be, optimistic. And I don't think that's what David was doing. I don't know that he actually believed verses 6 and 7 that said God is his rock and his shield. I think it was more in the framework of the person who Jesus encountered somewhere in the Gospels that uh, said, I believe, help me in my unbelief.
Yeah.
In other words, like those are two incongruent things. But what he was saying is like, I recognize somehow that you are real, that this is true. Experientially, right now, my logic, my emotions, my body, all these things does not track with it. Does not. But I'm going to choose to go for that little piece. I think that's what David was saying, and I think that's what God was inviting me to do. Is as I was at the end of myself, as I did not want to keep serving, keep on writing, keep on waking up some days, uh, that God was still gently inviting me.
Yeah.
And that part of that invitation was to be public with it so that someone who feels alone in their struggling, someone that feels like they are suffering and nobody gets it, might stumble on even a sentence and say, oh, like he gets it. He put words to what I'm experiencing. Maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm not alone. Um, and that's who I want to show up like that. But if I'm transparent, the end of the story is not then I got to book 12 and everything was better. No, book 12 was the most heartbreaking book because you and I were talking earlier about books and my kids being a part of it, and you were talking about a book about a cat. And my last book last year is called Missing Chloe, and in November of last year, through a series of events, man, I might even start crying now talking about it.
No.
Our cat of 14 years, I had pets all my life.
Mhm.
She was not a pet. I mean, she was a comfort to me when I needed comfort. Like it's just one of those kind of pets. Some people know what I'm talking about, and
More like family.
more like family.
Yeah.
And she just walked out the door one day, and that was it.
Oh.
And we didn't know if she was alive or dead.
Mm.
And it's that unknowing that was so hard, right? And so our family was struggling to process that, and we were in different places. And the way we processed it is we said, well, let's just imagine that there is a good story that she is living. What might that story be? And
Mm.
each family member had an opportunity to tell their story of what happened to Chloe. And one story had her coming home, one story had her dying.
Mm.
One story had her not coming home, but finding a new family. Like it's just, and it's, some of the kids made it into a comic book form, some drew pictures. But if I'm honest, man, I was so mad at God in December because I had been trying to serve him all year. I had written a book a month. I had continued to serve in other ways, some huge ways with particularly a friend of mine who's older and wrestling with dementia, and so many things that needed so much from me. And not only did God not reward me with that, not only did God meet some of the very core needs that I'm like, God, can you just refuel in this area? He took my cat away. Literally the night before she went missing, I was I had gone through some really just depleting things. And she would do this thing where she'd come up to me and like stretch her front paws up on my leg to tell me to pick her up, and then I'd drape her over my shoulder, and she was just rubbing her head against me, and I just remember like holding her and being like, "Thank you, God." Like, and through for the last 14, 15 years, whenever I've had a hard day, I always knew she would at some point come and sit with me, and then she was gone the next day. And I'm like, God, what are you doing? Like, I just told you. And I know this is just a cat, but you knew. You knew. And here we are in 2026. And a lot of that pain, a lot of those struggles aren't solved or fixed. The end of the year of books wasn't, and now I am restored.
Mm.
And now, the book I'm working on, which I'm annoyed at God that I'm working on it, is rejecting hope no longer. Because in the
Mm.
same way that I was rejecting joy, I'm sitting here getting mad about how hopeless I'm starting to feel because everything I've tried doesn't work. Every time I've asked him to help, he didn't do it, and things keep getting worse. And I don't know what's going to happen this year. And I'm getting mad at God about the lack of hope. And
Mm.
meanwhile, Scripture is like, no, hope is there. Maybe God's not the issue. Maybe hope's not the issue. Maybe you're rejecting it because it's not the hope you wanted. It's not in the way you wanted. And so I'm 3 days in,
Mm.
and the way that I'm doing it is I want to be really transparent and vulnerable. So, and I really wish I wasn't doing it this way, but I'm going on live on Facebook, and I have all the verses that I searched for the word hope in verses, found 30 of them without reading them too deeply, so I could go in completely fresh. And each time I will pray, and then I will pull out a random verse, and I won't know what I'm about to read until I read it, and then I read it. In the past 3 days, I've laughed every time because there is something in it that is just hilarious to me. Like one verse said, "Because we have this hope, we are very bold." And I laughed because I'm like, I do not feel very bold,
Right.
nor do I want to be very bold.
Right.
Today's verse talks about how we eagerly wait. It's hard enough to wait. I'm not eager to wait, though. I begrudgingly wait, but I don't want to eagerly wait. And what's happening is God is pushing me to be honest with myself and with Him as I process it. And then He's most likely going to say, okay, now let others into your mess. And so I do want to just encourage people, because we live in a culture, and a lot of our churches operate this way, where in order to have value, you need to be put together. You need to be an expert. And if you're not either of those things, if you're struggling, if you think you're weak in some way, you need to not be at the table. You have nothing to offer. Well, that's not true. In fact, Scripture literally says the opposite of it. In many places, but most notably when the Apostle Paul says to a group of people, he's like, hey, look, this is the me Paul version where it's not verbatim, but he's like, hey, look, a lot of you weren't smart when I gave you. A lot of you weren't gifted. A lot of you weren't skilled, and God chose you. And He chose you to shame the smart, the wise, the strong, because when something happens, when God works, if we do believe we're smart enough and strong enough and skilled enough and all that, we might boast in ourselves. But if you know you're not, if you know you are out of fuel and you have nothing left, not even the desire, but you're still showing up, then when something happens, you know that it was God and not you. And that's how I want to encourage people is the qualification for being used by God is for God to use you and you to not reject it. Like, that's it. And the ability to not reject doesn't take any strength at all.
Right. It's like a willingness to just go. If
Yeah.
God calls you, you just go. You don't ask the questions that you want to.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be like, well, wait a minute. I got a list of questions I got here for you first. If you can give me all the right answers, then I'll
Yeah.
think about it or I'll show up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we just have to step out on faith and just do it anyway. And I love that you talked about being mad at God, because I've talked to so many people And so many people are like, oh, I've never been mad at God. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what world you're living in because I'm pretty sure you probably maybe have. I'm like, are you sure about that? Because,
Mhm.
when I talk about, like certain situations in my life and as we conquer and get over strongholds that hold us back from our God-given purpose, I feel like being mad at God was part of that recovery. I had to get mad at God um, when he took my mom, and now my grandma has dementia. I take care of her. My mom had dementia, and then, and it's just like I've had my grandma for 7 years. We didn't think she was going to be around this long, but now she's on hospice, and like the long goodbye really does exist. I had always heard
Right.
about it, but I didn't know I was going to live it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I was like, oh my goodness, Lord. And just when I talk about being mad at God, I'm like, man, are is that okay? Are we allowed to be mad at God? Is that
Mhm.
something that's okay? And I'm like, well, Jesus got mad. Jesus flipped
Mhm.
tables. He showed he didn't sin in it, but he got mad.
Yeah.
Um, and I was like, so I think God understands when we're mad. He knows we're going to get mad. I mean, that's part of an emotion that he gave us, is anger. We just have to choose
Mhm.
how we, reciprocate it, how we what our reaction is to what we're doing and why we're being mad about things. And I know with hope and exactly what you're saying with the hope and the joy is like some days I get up and I'm like, I just really, I'm trying really hard to have a peaceful day. And
Mhm.
just one thing will, go off kilter. And I'm a little bit OCD, so I have I kind of drive people crazy in that area. But I'm like, oh gosh, and I get up and something's like not where it's supposed to be or how it's supposed to be. And I think, I can either let this affect me or I can let it go. Or I could
Mhm.
just, I turn on worship and just, soak in, worship music and sit with the Lord and read scripture and pray. Although those things that they say, well, go do this and that, you'll feel better. And
Mhm.
sometimes I think, man, I don't know if God's listening. Where is he? Where is he in this? And I
Mhm.
know that they say, the teacher's always quiet during the test, but I'm like, how long is this test gonna
Yeah.
last? Like,
Yeah.
can I
Yeah.
just turn it in already? I'll take the grade you give me right now if you just give me an answer. You know,
Mhm.
I told that to
Mhm.
somebody and they're like, oh man, if you just hand in your paper and God gives you the answer right then and there,
Yeah.
that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we feel like we need that, even though God's timing, he knows what's best for us more than we know for ourselves.
Mhm.
And he knows the end of our story. He knows where we're going, everything we're going to do. And so it's hard to
Yeah.
be patient sometimes in that waiting and that waiting and that waiting and that waiting. And like, God, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I can completely relate with that, with having to go, you start losing the joy, you start losing your hope, and you just feel kind of stagnant. I feel,
Mhm.
oh, I like nothing is working. I don't know about you, but I don't monetize podcasting. I haven't started monetizing or any of that,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
and I was, I wasn't really sure if I should. I really have been praying about it. Like, Lord, I don't want to just um, this is a faith-based podcast, and I don't want it to be like I'm just putting pennies in my pocket and having conversations about you so I can profit from it.
Right.
I don't want
Right.
people to think that about me. I've not, gained one penny from podcasting, and I'm okay with
Mhm.
that. But people are like,
Mhm.
"Why aren't you? You spend a lot of time, investing in it." And I said, God spent a lot of time investing in me.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like repaying the favor. But I get
Yeah.
what, like when you say you're a volunteer minister, but it's like sometimes like when you go to the church, the pastors are getting paid. People get paid to be in positions.
Mhm.
And I always wonder, like, God, what position are you going to put me in? Like a paid position or an unpaid position?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's not that he doesn't want us to have finances, because he does, and abundance. He doesn't care. We could have a lot or we could have a little, you know. I think God knows what we're going to do with it,
Mhm.
and if we're going to be wise or not. And I can just see how people get really torn and twisted and frustrated with God because I just did a big segment on prayer in my other podcast with my friend. We've been
Mhm.
talking about prayer a lot because I feel like sometimes people go and they pray, and if it's not met right now, instantaneously,
Yeah.
They just forget about it. Oh, well, God must not like me. God must not care. It's like, it kind of is like the poor me attitude, like, oh man, he
Yeah.
must not care about me because he didn't do this for me. Like, why would he do this for me?
Hmm.
And I've had those poor me moments myself where I just felt like, God, what is going on? Because sitting in that waiting transition is no fun. It's like being at the hospital for 6 hours before they call you back, and you
Hmm.
just want to go
Hmm.
home and get healed, forget the hospital,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I feel like we get lost in that sometimes, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think of the passage in scripture where the apostle Paul says, I've learned the secret to being content in every situation, in any and every situation, I believe is how it puts it, whether well fed or hungry, and he lists all these things. But experientially in his life, he had experienced being on the top and the bottom, being celebrated and being stoned, or like left. Yeah, I think he was stoned and left for
Yeah.
dead at one point. Um, he went through a lot. And it's those words, the secret to being content in any and every situation.
Right.
Like there's no like that's everything.
Yeah.
Like the worst case scenario is included in any and every. And he is saying it is possible to be content. Um, that is not what we tend to believe. What we tend to believe is in order to be content, dot, dot, dot. In order for me to have joy, this is what has to happen. In order for me to have hope, this is what needs to change. Like we are locked in to that mindset. Put another way, we, at the very least subconsciously, but oftentimes are naming it, have a solidified idea of what we need.
Mhm.
And most of the time, it is logical. If we are in an unjust situation, it's probably logical to say, I need that to change. If you are a human that has bills, it is logical to say, I need money. And then we get this God who, throughout scripture, invites people into situations and invites them to operate in ways that are counter to logic, that actually are at times impossible. And I've had to navigate this when it comes to money because I know how money works, right? Uh, and yet God invited me to go without a paycheck since 2018. I've got a wife, I've got kids, I'm in a house that has a mortgage, right? Like, so how does this work? And what God was impressing upon me is I don't need money, I need Him. He can provide. He can provide through money, and He has at times, but that hasn't been the predominant way.
Yeah.
The numbers have not added up most of the time. And so his provision has taken an assortment of creative forms. And I've had to learn how to live in this tension of understanding how the world works without being bound to it. Scripture says, be in and not of the world. Like there are realities of this world, but the invitation is to say, yes, these are the realities of this world, but this is greater reality.
Yeah.
A God who can part the sea. And that right there is something that hit me this week is uh, in Exodus 15, it starts with Moses singing this song of joy because they had just experienced God parting a body of water so large they couldn't see to the other side of it. And doing so when they were blocked between that and an Egyptian army that was going to murder them. And this was after they had finally been freed after 400 years. And they had witnessed God doing, I mean, mind blowing acts of power. That's where we enter in Exodus 15. They have just left the sea, and it took 3 days before they start grumbling. 3 days after the sea. The reason they're grumbling is because after 3 days, they realize they hadn't found any water. And so they grumble. They actually find some water, but it's bitter. So that's almost like insult to injury.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, there's one. Oh, I
Yeah.
can't even drink it. So they're
Right.
mad. They are
Yeah.
mad. Moses calls out to God. God gives them a stick to throw in the water, makes it sweet. And then the very next stop they make, the very next place that God takes them is this oasis of like 12 springs, 70 palm trees. It's almost like God is showing off. But this is what struck me. And I've shared this a few times with people because it's just, I feel like it's really important in naming how our invitation and how we can encounter God and how we can understand God is there's two things that are true in this. One, uh, there's a we they could be justified in being upset that they didn't have water after 3 days because logically the human body needs water, and they
Correct.
say that after 3 days, that tends to be when your body is done. Like if you go 3 days without water, that's it.
Yeah.
It shuts down. You go into a coma. You die. Maybe you make it to 4 if you're strong and healthy and young. By day 2, though, you're barely functioning. Your cognitive abilities are messed up. Your blood pressure is out of whack. You got muscle cramps, and then you can't talk because your voice is like your mouth is just dry as a bone and angry, and all these things. That's day 2. So they're justified, right? Except what's really strange is there's no mention of any of these issues in that verse.
Mm.
All it says is they'd been traveling for 3 days, and then on or after the third day, they say, "Where are we going to find water?" Uh, Maybe some of them were very strong, but we have to remember there were hundreds of thousands of them. And so there were infants, and there were folks that were, at the end of life.
Elderly, yeah.
How likely is it that those people could have even made it a day without water? But what we see in that verse is not only is there no mention of any dehydration, they were still traveling on that third day.
Hmm.
They had the ability to grumble on that third day, to communicate. Like, in other words, something supernatural was happening. Something miraculous was happening. They had traveled 3 days without water and were still traveling.
Yeah.
And the question in my mind was, were they actually thirsty? Or were
Hmm.
they so conditioned to know how life worked that they believed they were supposed to be thirsty in that moment? And because they believed they were supposed to be thirsty, they start grumbling against Moses and really against God because he wasn't providing what he was supposed to provide. He was not provided what they needed. Meanwhile, God's up there like, are you kidding me? You don't
Sustaining
need
them.
water.
Yeah.
I just gave you the supernatural ability to not need water. And if anybody's like, well, are you how that's not a thing. In scripture, there are many accounts of people going 3 days or more without water. The next one that was going to happen is Moses himself going up the mountain and going 40 days without food and water. There is a biblical precedent for God being able to sustain people without the things that they biologically need. And so, what if there are moments in our life that we don't have hope, we don't have joy, we are struggling because we know what we need? We
Hmm.
know what God needs to do, and He is not doing it. And so we're mad at Him, and
Right.
we're giving up. And meanwhile, God's like, "You have no idea the
Yeah.
supernatural way I'm actually sustaining you. You are chasing after something you don't actually need."
Hmm.
And if we were to start to understand this God of love in that way, this God who was not oblivious or ignorant to the biological need for thirst, like if we know that this same God is not ignorant to our situations, how can that change our ability to trust? Even if it is a begrudging trust, where it's like David saying, "How long, O Lord? What I believe is you are not present, but I'm going to name it in these last two verses who you are. And that's what I'm going to step into. But oh, I am struggling." Like, even if it's that, it doesn't have to be the praise Jesus. Like, it can be lament. But orienting ourselves towards this God of love, how might that change our situation and then allow us to encounter what Paul encountered? Suddenly we're like, how in the world am I content right now?
Yeah.
I shouldn't be content in this situation. Ooh, I might have just found the secret.
I think obedience falls in that category as well with
Mm-hmm.
being content because we when we're not being content, we're not being obedient to God.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not trusting in His word and what His word says that He is capable of doing because we're not obedient to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
believe that. And a short story I'll share with you pertaining to finances. A friend of mine was moving, and I thought it was crazy. They said we need X amount of money to move, and we don't have any. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Well, how you can do that?" You're just gonna move? And she's like, yeah, God said to move. And I was kind of like, I'm gonna watch to see how this pans out, right? I'm like, I'm gonna stay really close to this because
Yeah.
I loved the faith that they just came right out to the church and said, we feel the Lord is calling us here. Um, and we don't have the financial means. It's going to cost $7,000 for us to move, and we don't have any money. My husband just lost his job. He just had shoulder surgery, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just like, oh my goodness. And so, of course, the church rallied up and gave him donations and stuff like that. And I remember God telling me, you need to help them. And I was like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. And then God did something, a crazy work in me over this situation because he's like, you're going to help them. And I was like, okay, well, I'm thinking, okay, I'll probably give them like, $50, right? I'll
Mm-hmm.
give them $10. And God's like, no, you're going to help them, but I need you to wait. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, wait for what? And so it was like, so they had 3 months to move, right? After
Mm-hmm.
they got out of their house. 2 weeks before they were to move, God said, call your friend and ask her how much money they need. And I literally remember walking around the room going, I am not doing this because I already knew what God was doing. And I was like, nope, not doing it, not doing it. And God goes, call her. And I called her and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm hoping that all of the money came in, right? And that she only needs like $10 or whatever, right? And so I was like, okay. And I called her and she said, she was crying because someone had just given her a big donation. And that made me really excited right off the
Mm-hmm.
bat, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, this is going to sound really weird, but God is telling me to ask you how much more you need. Like he's made me wait this whole time to want to give to you guys for this moment for some reason. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like I need to be obedient. And she said, we need $1,000. And I almost fell on the floor. I was like, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
And God said, tell her it's done. And I was like
Mm-hmm.
immediately, and I was like, okay. I said, it's done. And she's like, what? 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 And I said, and she,
Yeah.
she's like, are you serious? I said, yeah, it's done. And so I had never stepped out on that kind of like faith
Yeah.
before. I never did it. I'm like, I've given donations and I've paid my tithes and I've never just handed someone $1,000, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
like really frugal. What if my car breaks down? I need that money. That's my emergency fund. I'm sitting on
Yeah.
that for a
Yeah.
reason. And God said, not today. You don't need that money today. You give it to her. And I was like, I sort of like, you go to hand them the check and you're like, I don't want to give you this money. So I gave her the money.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I kid you not. Not even, I think it was 3 days later, I got a surprise check in the mail
Mm.
for 3 times the amount of that donation. And it
Wow.
was a mistake that was made at the IRS where they didn't pay me all my taxes or whatever it was. I got
Yeah.
this
Yeah. Yeah.
surprise check in the mail. And I was like, I was like I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like you knew this check was coming. You knew that I could
Mm-hmm.
afford. And he's like,
Yeah.
but they didn't have time to wait. They needed the money now. They were at the
Mm-hmm.
end of their time.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted me to trust that he was going to provide.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that money was going to come, and I had to step out on
Yeah.
that. And I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you, this is really crazy. My daughter thought I was nuts, but ever since then, when God
Mm-hmm.
tells me to give like that, I give. And then when I do it in obedience, he every single time I get surprised. I'm not kidding. I still to this day get surprise checks in the mail, and I don't know why I'm getting them.
Mm.
My daughter's
Mm-hmm.
like, "What in the world?" When I moved
Mm-hmm.
here, we've been here 7 years, and I was telling her about this story because this happened about 9 years ago. And I said, yeah, I started when God told me to give, I gave. And even if I was like, reluctant,
Mm-hmm.
I just did it. I'm like, God, you know how much I have or what I don't do and don't have. And he's like,
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to tell me what you have. I'm telling you what to do. He's
Yeah.
like, you
Yeah.
can. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was really hard for me. And
Yeah.
I was like, man, am I this selfish with money? Like, because I'm like, am I a tightwad? I'm hanging on to every penny.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd start doing it and God would just bless me, like immediately bless me back. It was
Yeah.
crazy. And then checks would start showing up. My daughter was like, I don't understand. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's just how God is. That's the power of God. And I'm not saying I get like thousands and thousands of dollars just drop in my mailbox. Like sometimes it'll be a $40 check. Sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
was like one time I got a $7 check and my daughter's like, what's the point of a $7 check? I go, hey, $7 is $7. I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to be. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I just got
Yeah.
blessed. Isn't that amazing
Yeah.
though?
Well, and I hope people hear the deeper truths of the story you told because it confronts a notion that we have, which is that the reason we pray is because we have a need and God needs to fill it. But it's like what we were saying earlier. Um, yeah, we perceive these needs, but sometimes what we see as a need is not actually a need. Or what we think we need is not actually the best thing for us. Like we know these things in our mind, and yet we still live as though the whole purpose of our interaction with God is to make our lives better.
Yeah.
And God does care for us, but what's interesting is his goal is not for us to have the storybook life. Even if he gives that to someone, like that is not his intention, because what he knows is this life that you and I are living is going to eventually end and fade away.
Right.
Like he has created us as eternal beings. Like there's an eternity that we were actually created for. And scripture talks about everything, everything as like grass that withers and fades away, as light and momentary troubles. And yet for us, this life, because it's all we know, it's all we've experienced, and deep down we still have a fear of it ending, we put a lot of weight. And so when the money isn't there, or when the opportunity is just out of reach, or we experience tremendous fear. And so I say all that to say that, the story you just told was not simply a story of someone had a need and that need was met. Like their need was met. Also, God was doing immeasurably more, right? Because he could have just made the money show up in their bank account without anybody. But one of the other things that he wanted to do was impact other people's lives. One of the things that he did with you was totally and utterly change how you interact with him, how you love others, and your relationship with money, which is huge because Jesus had a lot of stuff to say about money. One of the big things that he said was, you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money, because you are going to love the one and hate the other. You can't love them both. And unfortunately, particularly in American culture, love of money is huge. And some people hear that and they're like, well, I'm not greedy. Yes, that is one form of love of money. Another more common form of love of money is fear.
Yeah.
Like love is anything you give power over yourself to.
Yeah.
And we are prone to give money power over us. Most of our decisions are made based on money. And what you were invited into by God, not by choice,
Right.
but by God, was to operate in a very different way. You didn't have $1,000 to give. You didn't expect it to be that high. You're like, it's going to be 20, 50. Oh, good. She got a big donation.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. Wiping your brow.
Yeah.
And God said, I know that you used to think about from a scarcity mindset of the limited you have, and a kind of a preparative mindset, like what if something will happen. And that's wise, right? To have savings. And God's like, but I want to not tell you to forego all that, instead to put obedience to me first,
right?
Even if it'll cost you everything. And then he showed a different way economy works, that normally if you give $1,000 away, then you're out $1,000. And God's like, yeah, that can normally work, but also like I can make money appear in a fish's mouth. So I can make a $3,000 check come that you didn't even know was coming.
Exactly.
But this is what's really important for people to know. We're also not saying if you do this, then you will get lots of money.
Right.
Because as you're telling that story, I'm thinking of plenty of ways that I was generous in 2025 and could have really used God giving me a $3,000 check, and he didn't. So does that mean I didn't pray well enough? I didn't do no. Because God's not after our bank accounts being better.
Right.
Here's a way I'll put it. We often think of Jesus as a healer, and we think that one of the big important things that he did was heal people. He did heal people. Healing their physical bodies was not the point. Part of the reason that he did that is it showed prophecy to be true. The blind will see, but and then another piece of why he did it is because he was after a deeper healing. And so I'll say two things. One of the evidence for this is that if healing was the point, then why were there so many people Jesus didn't heal? Think of the pool of Bethesda. It talks about him healing one person. One person. That area was filled with people who were longing just as hard for healing. And it mentions not a single other healing. Ooh, that's kind of cruel. Right? Except it wasn't. Jesus was trying to do something immeasurably more in that space. And the second is the story of the person who was crippled, and his friends wanted to get him to Jesus, and it was crowded, so they went up on the roof, tore the roof up, lowered him down because they wanted Jesus to heal his body. You know what Jesus didn't do? Heal his body. Not at first. What Jesus did, the healing that he did, was he said, your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
That was the healing that he did. He did end up healing his body, but it was because the Pharisees in the back corner started grumbling and, muttering things. And he recognized that the healing of the body was not because that person's body needed to be healed. It was because Jesus wanted to do something greater for the people that were watching. Because now your story about the giving $1,000, there may be someone who listens to that who is impacted as well, that you may never know the fruit of that. So your person seeking God for provision led to an impact in your life. The impact in your life could impact somebody else's life. And all of this can be happen because there's a God who has a greater creativity and understanding beyond us. Meanwhile, we're just here thinking about our here and now. But if we can break from that, if we can understand an eternal God and the invitation for heaven on earth, then we're no longer as bound to money, to control, to security. We can actually step in crazier ways because more and more we come to realize God actually is who he says he is.
Right. That's really good. I love that. I also think that during that situation, God stretched my faith where I didn't think I had faith.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he took me to a new level of faith
Yeah.
in him that I didn't know existed. But I remember like afterwards, I would kind of test the waters sometimes. I'm like I'm gonna try this again. I'm gonna try
Yeah.
this again. I'm gonna see if this is really the real thing. Like
Uh-huh.
was that like a quinky dink or what? But and God, just like I said, then I think because I tested it so many times, God just started like giving me check. It was weird giving me checks, and
Mm-hmm.
I told my pastor. I went to my pastor about it. He's like, you need to tell people about this story. He's like, this is really amazing. What has happened with them coming here, and trusting God, and then you
Mm-hmm.
trusting God. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
God's given his provision, because
Mm-hmm.
what God wants to happen will happen. It will come to pass.
Yeah.
If it's not meant to be, then it won't happen.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
with that, it really built up a lot of faith in me. And
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't so, it's not that I felt like I was being greedy, but I like to be safe, keep myself
Yeah.
in a comfort zone of, I got to have this little money in this little pocket over here just in case
Mm-hmm.
something happens.
Yeah.
And God's like, I know what you're saving it for, but that's not going to happen. So I need you to trust me right now. You're going to give it away.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I've saved all that money for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
But it really did stretch me. And I didn't even tell my friend what happened until later. I didn't tell her the whole
Mm.
me pacing the living room, having the conversation with God, like, no, 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 no. And he's like, yes, yes, yes. And, and
Yeah.
give her a call and ask her how much she needs and then tell her it's done. And I
Yeah.
was like thinking, Lord, I know this is you talking, but I'm not really sure this is you talking.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, when I told her the story, she cried again, actually, it
Yeah.
really, really
Yeah.
touched her heart. But, um, yeah, with that being said, I love what you're doing. The books you're writing. Um, thank you for sharing like, the hardships. I totally can understand it. And I love your vulnerability just to talk about the times that you got mad at God, because people really honestly they don't admit that.
Yeah.
They do not
Yeah.
admit that they get mad at God. And that's so that so bothers me because it's like I am I the only person that gets mad at God then? I'm like, oh man, I must be a really
Yeah.
horrible person if I'm getting mad at God and no one else is. So that
Mm-hmm.
that really brought a blessing to me today because
Mm.
I always feel like that, and then sometimes it makes you feel like, oh, they must be better Christians than me because they don't ever get mad at God. I must
Mm.
be a horrible
Yeah. Yeah.
Christian or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's the enemy that just wants to make you, put thoughts in your mind, and we just have to take those thoughts captive and take them to the knowledge of God and be like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't measuring up. But
Yeah.
with all that being said, I just thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your
Yeah.
testimony. Can you tell our listeners like where they can find you and um, what your website is, and give them that
Yeah.
information before we close out here?
Yeah. So, uh, like you, I don't do this for income, self promotion, anything like that. In fact, like I have a page that has all my books like available for free because I don't want money to be a barrier. Uh,
Yeah.
the reason I do this is because God's invited me to cultivate authentic, accessible space to process who He is, who He's made us to be, and what that means for today. Whether that be in the form of a book or a podcast conversation, a video, or a conversation on the porch. That's what I'm trying to do, is to cultivate authentic, accessible space. And so if anybody is wanting to find that kind of a space, if they're feeling alone or unheard or unknown, um, wheredidyousseegod.com is where you can find everything. A couple dozen books. So there's probably one that speaks to where you are today. Again, if money is a barrier, reach out. I will make sure you can get it for free, because at the end of the day, like that, I don't know what God's going to do. I want to be willing and available for however He sends me, while also knowing I may never see what happens until eternity. But I don't want anybody to feel like they are alone, lost, unwanted, unknown, unloved. God sees you, and if I don't know you and don't see you, He does and can make that connection.
Oh, that's good. I have a question about your logo.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was looking at that. Can you explain like how you came up with that
Mhm.
logo? Because it's a pretty cool looking logo. I was like, I gotta ask him about that logo.
Here's what's wild. I made that logo in 2018, and I think you're like the third person to ask me, which blows my mind. Because I'm like, what? I know there's got to be most people not knowing what this is, but only three are bold enough to ask. So thank you for your boldness.
Thanks.
So it's two pieces. So I created it when I felt like I was inviting me to start recording Where Did You See God? And the two components are, one is very clear, the question mark, but the other is the theta, the Greek th, which is how uh, the word God, theos, starts. And so it's basically that represents God. And then the question mark is right there in the middle, both to capture the core question, where did you see God? But two, to really be honest about what you and I have just spent some time exploring. Like, it is hard to understand God sometimes. God is confusing often. And it's because His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. He is actually beyond our comprehension. So, of course, it's going to be frustrating sometimes. Of course, it's going to be confusing. But this is the good news. And I was thinking about this as you were talking. Um, Somebody might be wrestling with that idea of being angry at God. So, another way to put it, because we have a lot of experiences with anger, what we're really saying is being honest with God. There's a lot of reasons we're not honest with God. How can we be more honest with God? Because what that is actually pinpointing is that God is inviting us to know Him, is inviting us to relationship with Him. When we're not honest with Him, we're intentionally or not disconnecting from relationship. If we're afraid to be honest with God, the invitation is to say, God can handle it. God can handle your raw words. He cares more about connection than He does about your composure. so so whether it's anger or lament or no words at all, I've given God the silent treatment in the past couple months.
Yeah.
But I did so knowing, like, God, I don't even want to pray to you right now, but I
Yep.
know you're still with me and I'm still with you, but right? God can handle it. So that's what we're saying. It's just
And yet
be
you were
honest,
still
because
talking to him in the
still
meantime.
silence, and,
Yeah.
and also silence speaks so much too. And
Yeah.
God's silence, whew, sometimes there's more to that than if He gave us some clear words. So that's how I want to encourage people, is we are all asking that question of not just where do we see God, but where is God? Who is God? What is God? And and He can handle our questions, and He is going to walk with us through it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said like, he's so much bigger than what we are. Like we can't even fathom.
Yeah.
We can try, but we can't even fathom it. Like we are gonna be so surprised when we get to heaven,
Yeah.
we actually get to be there. You can't even try to imagine it because it's so out of our supernatural realm,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
we operate in the physical, he operates in the supernatural, and just, we're just not going to get it until we go see him, when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
And I,
Yeah.
I always think when I get to heaven, I have so many questions I'm going to ask. I just know it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
at other times I'm not going to have any questions. I'm just going to be in awe.
Yeah.
Part of me goes, I have so many questions. And the other part goes, no, actually, I'm probably just going to be in awe, you know?
Yeah.
of the
Yep.
wonder
Yep.
and amazement, because it's
Yep.
going to be so much more than I'd ever thought it could be, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
well, I just want to say thank you for coming on Crushing Strongholds today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for
Yeah.
having the time. Thank you for rescheduling with me. I appreciate you
Yeah.
doing that too. I really do appreciate that, and sharing your testimony as well. I will put your information in the show notes. I do that with every episode that I run, and put your information out there so people know how to reach you. And so they can go check out all those stories. Tori the Tornado is an adorable book. So if you like kids stories, if you got kids, you want to read them a book, I suggest getting that.
Thank you.
Really, really cute. I love how you did the little clip to go with it. That was
Yeah.
so great. I loved it. I
Yeah.
was like, oh my gosh, it's such a good idea.
Yeah.
So when I get my book out, I'm going to do a little clip to go with it. So
Yeah.
you
Well,
gave me a
and I'll
good
throw a
idea.
bonus out there. I have some free audiobook codes, and so if anybody wants the Tour the Tornado audiobook, where each of my kids and my wife played a role in it, it is the cutest audiobook you'll
It
ever hear.
is.
I'm happy to give free audiobook codes away to anybody who reaches out. So
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. I'll put that in the show notes too, because it is really a cute story. I thought it was,
Mhm.
and it has a good storyline with it, you know.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love it,
yeah,
what you
yeah.
guys created. So,
Thank you.
but with that being said, to our listeners, just want to say thank you to everyone that's joined in and is listening today. And I hope you got as much out of this episode as I did. And I hope you enjoyed it. You can also reach myself at crushingstrongholds.com. You can reach out for prayer. You can reach out for clarity calls. Um, anything that you're needing. If you're just having a struggle trying to get past some strongholds in your life, just reach out to me and let's just meet up and talk and just see what we can do to help each other. And that's what Crushing Strongholds is all about. Getting people past just a little bit over that threshold, you know,
Mm,
so we can just keep on striving after God. So thank you again, Paul, for being here. And
my pleasure.
to all my listeners, I hope you have a great, wonderful day and God bless you all.